When people talk about betrayal, they usually describe it like an explosion. Loud, shocking, over in an instant. But that's not how mine happened. Mine unfolded slowly, like a leak in a pipe behind the wall. Quiet at first, invisible even, until one day the entire house was flooded. My name's Ethan Walker. I used to think I came from one of those families that had everything figured out. The kind you see in those glossy lifestyle magazines. Big houses, lake vacations, polite smiles hiding just enough distance to look sophisticated. My father, Richard Walker, built his fortune the old-fashioned way, with sweat, timing, and the kind of charisma that could turn a room of strangers into believers. And then there was Clara. She came into my life 5 years ago, when everything still felt simple. I met her at a charity gala my father hosted. She was working the event, a volunteer handing out glasses of champagne. I remember the way she laughed when I accidentally spilled one on myself. It wasn't a rehearsed laugh. It felt real, unguarded. That night we talked until the staff started cleaning up around us. She told me she didn't belong in places like that she was just trying to find her way after her mom's passing. I told her I didn't belong there either, that I was just playing the part expected of me. 2 weeks later, we were inseparable. For years, Clara was everything I thought love was supposed to be. Patient, grounded, kind. She hated attention, never asked for anything extravagant, and always encouraged me to stand apart from my father's shadow. When she said, "You're not him, Ethan. You don't have to be," I believed her. Then came the diagnosis. My father had been coughing for months, brushing it off like every other stubborn man does, until the doctor used the word terminal. Lung cancer, stage 4. The world didn't crash that day. It just tilted. Suddenly, everything I cared about shrank to a single point. The hospital room where he sat, hooked to machines that beeped like mechanical heartbeats. Clara was the first person I called, and she was there, always there. She brought him homemade soup, adjusted his pillows, laughed at his dry jokes. Sometimes, when I walked in, I'd find them talking quietly, about books, life, or business, as if they'd known each other for years. I remember thinking, I've never loved her more than now. But love can be a magician. It can make you blind while convincing you that you see everything. After a few months, my father insisted on returning home. He said hospitals made him feel like a ghost in training. So we set up care at the estate. That's when Gerald Price started showing up more often. Gerald was my father's longtime business partner, a man with the polished charm of someone who'd learned early how to smile while lying. My father trusted him like a brother, which meant I had to tolerate him, though every instinct in me said otherwise. He was the kind of person who always touched your shoulder when he spoke to you, not to connect, but to control the space. He wore too much cologne, talked too loud, and always managed to make his generosity sound like a favor you owed him. At first, I thought he was simply helping with my father's affairs, updating documents, arranging meetings, managing accounts. But soon I noticed something that didn't sit right. Clara started staying late after I went home. She said Dad needed her to go over his medications, but I'd see Gerald's car parked outside the study window. When I asked her about it, she smiled like she always did. Soft, reassuring. "He's just helping with the financial stuff your dad doesn't want to burden you with. He told me he trusts me to keep things in order." It sounded reasonable, and maybe that's why I ignored the knot in my stomach that night, the one that would later feel prophetic. One evening, a few weeks before my father's last hospital stay, he asked me to sit with him on the porch. The sun was setting over the property, painting the lake orange and gold. "You've always been a good son, Ethan," he said, staring at the horizon. "Better than I deserved." I smiled weakly. "Don't start talking like that." "I have to. We don't get to pick our goodbyes, but we do get to leave things right." He turned to me then, his eyes sharper than they'd been in months. "There are people who show up in your life because they love you, and people who show up because they love what you have. It's not always easy to tell which is which." I frowned, confused. "Dad, what are you saying?" He sighed. "Just "Be careful who you let near your name, son." At the time, I didn't understand what he meant. I thought the illness was making him suspicious, maybe even paranoid. But looking back now, I think that was the closest thing he could manage to a warning. A week later, he was gone. Peacefully, the doctor said. In his sleep, the funeral was quiet. Family, a few friends, a handful of old associates. Clara stood beside me the whole time, holding my hand, whispering that he'd be proud of me. I believed her. It wasn't until 2 weeks later that everything started to unravel. I was called to my father's lawyer's office for the reading of the will. Clara insisted on coming for emotional support. She wore black again, even though the funeral was long over. Gerald was already there when we arrived, seated like a man who owned the room. The lawyer, a soft-spoken man named Leonard, began to read. My father had left me the estate, personal effects, and a modest trust fund. The bulk of the company's shares, however, a controlling 51%, were left to Gerald Price. Clara squeezed my hand, as if she already knew. Then came the part that turned the air to stone. And to Ms. Clara Hayes, for her devoted care and companionship during my final months, I leave the sum of $200,000. I turned to look at her. Her expression didn't change. Not surprise, not confusion, just acceptance. It was the first time I saw her as someone I didn't recognize. But that wasn't even the worst of it. Because when Leonard read the clause about Gerald's inheritance, he mentioned something else. Something buried deep in the legal phrasing. In the event that Mr. Price should marry within 1 year of my passing, his spouse shall share in the management rights and financial benefits of the Walker estate. The room went silent. Gerald didn't flinch. Clara didn't breathe. And I just sat there, realizing that maybe my father hadn't been paranoid after all. That night, I couldn't sleep. Clara said she was exhausted and went to bed early, but I stayed in my father's study, surrounded by the smell of his old books and cigar smoke. I poured a drink, trying to make sense of what had just happened. And then I saw it. On the corner of the desk, half hidden under a stack of papers, a small envelope with my name on it, my father's handwriting. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside, there was a single sentence. When the truth comes, don't run from it, follow it. That was the night I realized my father had seen everything long before I did, and for the first time in my life, I understood that love, the kind I thought I had with Clara, might have just been the prettiest disguise a liar ever wore. The days after the funeral blurred together. Condolences came and went. Casseroles piled up in the kitchen, and the house that once felt like a fortress of my childhood now echoed with silence. Every corner carried my father's scent. Every step reminded me of conversations we never got to finish. Clara handled the sympathy with professional grace, thanking guests, arranging flowers, coordinating the reception. She cried at the right moments, spoke softly about Richard's legacy, and even comforted me when I couldn't find the strength to respond to people's pity. But something about her grief felt rehearsed. Maybe it was the way she lingered near Gerald Price during the reception, speaking in hushed tones by the old oak desk that used to be my father's. Maybe it was the way she introduced him, Dad's most trusted partner, with a familiarity that didn't sit right. Gerald's hand lingered on her back too long when she turned to refill a glass of wine. I told myself I was imagining things. Grief makes you paranoid. But that illusion shattered 3 days later, during the reading of the will. We gathered in my father's lawyer's office. Polished mahogany, rows of old law books, the faint hum of the ceiling fan. Clara sat beside me, dressed in black, but wearing diamond earrings I didn't recognize. Gerald took the chair opposite, his suit as immaculate as his expressionless face. The lawyer, Mr. Halloway, cleared his throat and began reading in that slow, ceremonial tone reserved for men who've seen too many families fracture over money. To my son, Ethan Walker, I leave my home, my remaining personal assets, and my deepest trust that he will honor the Walker name with integrity and purpose. That line alone broke me. But the next one twisted the knife. To Clara, For her devoted care and companionship during my final months, I leave the sum of $50,000 and the 1967 Jaguar E-Type. May she always remember the value of loyalty and time. I froze. The Jaguar? My father's favorite car. He hadn't driven it in years, but it was his symbol, his pride. He'd once told me, "A man should only hand his keys to someone who knows what they're worth." Clara pressed her hand over her mouth, feigning shock. "Oh, Ethan, I didn't expect that," she whispered. Neither did I. Then came the last clause, the one that made my stomach turn. To my business partner, Mr. Gerald Price, I leave controlling shares of Walker Industries, to be managed with transparency and purpose. Should he marry within 1 year of my passing, his spouse shall inherit joint rights to said shares. Clara's breath caught, just a flicker, but enough for me to notice. Gerald didn't move, didn't blink, but his jaw tightened for half a second before he resumed that boardroom calm. When the reading ended, Holloway closed the folder gently. "I'm sorry for your loss, Ethan. Your father spoke highly of you." I nodded mechanically, thanked him, and walked out with Clara beside me. She was unusually quiet, almost nervous. That night, I couldn't sleep. The letter my father left me echoed in my head. When the truth comes, don't run from it. Follow it. So I started following. The first thing I checked were my father's phone records. I knew his password. He'd never hidden it from me. In the final months, while I was working late and Clara was supposedly caring for him, he'd had frequent calls with her, sometimes lasting hours. That made sense. She was helping him with medication, appointments, logistics, but one number appeared repeatedly in those same logs. Gerald's. Sometimes late at night. Sometimes minutes after a call with Clara ended. Then came the financials. Clara had made multiple transfers from her account to a holding company 2 months before my father's death. Small amounts, 500 here, 1,000 there. But the account name was Price Capital Holdings, one of Gerald's shell companies. My father must have known. He'd always been sharp even when sick. He'd probably seen through her before I did. That's why he'd added that marriage clause. It wasn't an oversight, it was bait, but I needed proof. The next afternoon I visited the Walker Industries office. It had been weeks since I'd stepped foot there. But the place hadn't changed. The same glass walls, the same expensive scent of cedar polish. Gerald was in a meeting, but his assistant, a kind woman named Lila, looked surprised to see me. "Ethan, I didn't know you'd be coming by. Mr. Price is in with investors." "That's all right," I said. "Just needed to grab a few of my father's personal documents. He mentioned leaving something for me in his old office." She nodded, hesitated, then said quietly, "Be quick." The old office still had his name on the door. Inside, the air smelled faintly of tobacco and paper. His desk was spotless, except for a single leather-bound notebook in the top drawer, and a sealed envelope labeled, "In case he asks." I tore it open. Inside was a printed photo. Clara, sitting at an upscale restaurant. Gerald across from her. The timestamp, 2 months before Dad died. They weren't just eating. Their hands were joined across the table. Underneath the photo was a note, in my father's unmistakable handwriting. "If she ever claims innocence, show her this. She will know where it came from." My throat closed. I sat in that chair, his chair, staring at the photo until my vision blurred. I didn't know whether to rage or to laugh. Clara had spent those last months calling me heartless for being too focused on work, too distant while she handled everything. I believed her. I let her comfort me, guilt me even. And the whole time, she'd been working her way into my father's world, and into Gerald's. When I came home that night, Clara was sitting on the couch, a half-empty wineglass in hand, flipping through old photos of my father's memorial. She smiled faintly when she saw me. "You okay?" she asked softly. I looked at her, really looked, and saw what I'd missed before. Every gesture, every kind word, every tear at the funeral now felt like a performance she'd practiced for months. "Yeah," I said finally. "Just thinking about what comes next." She tilted her head, curious. You mean the company? Yeah, I said, forcing a small smile. The company. Because now I wasn't just grieving my father, I was preparing for war. The days that followed felt like walking through fog, heavy, silent, and disorienting. Every time Clara smiled, I saw the photo from my father's drawer flash in my mind. Her fingers on Gerald's hand, the same fingers that had brushed mine while pretending to comfort me. I didn't confront her immediately. Not yet. Instead, I started documenting. I learned that when people lie this well, emotion only clouds judgment. I needed proof, not rage. I went back to the office under the pretense of reviewing financial transitions for my father's estate. Lila, Gerald's assistant, seemed uneasy. When I asked her how things had been since Dad's passing, she hesitated. "Mr. Price has been different," she said. "He's been meeting privately with legal counsel a lot, and he's had Ms. Clara come in for a few advisory meetings." "Advisory?" I repeated. Lila nodded. "About the succession plan, apparently. She said she was helping finalize some of your father's pending agreements." My pulse quickened. My father had finished all contracts before he passed. I'd seen the files. There was no reason for her to be involved at all. "Lila," I said quietly, "if there's any paperwork or emails mentioning her name, could you send them to me? Just for clarity." She gave me a long look, one that said she already suspected something wasn't right, and then nodded. That night she forwarded me an entire folder of correspondence, emails between Clara and Gerald dating back 6 months before my father died. Most were professional at first. Discussion of estate planning, medical updates, business continuity. But slowly the tone changed. Gerald calling her "dear," Clara signing off with "yours." Hidden among them were encrypted attachments, files with code names like Silverline and C Agreement. One message stopped my breath cold. From Clara H. to Gerald Price. Subject: Proposal Revision. Date: April 3rd. We should finalize the terms before Richard's passing is made public. The legal team needs time to process the spouse clause. Once that's complete, I'll ensure Ethan doesn't contest the transition. You handle the board, I'll handle him. Handle me. It was all there. The manipulation, the precision, the plan. They hadn't just taken advantage of grief. They had orchestrated it. My father's will hadn't been a coincidence. It had been a trap, one they thought they'd escaped. The next morning, I booked a flight to Boston, Gerald's other office, the one he used for investment retreats. I knew Clara had been there once under the pretense of a conference. If there was evidence of their relationship, it would be there. The building was older, tucked away in a quiet district. I bribed the building manager for access to the storage floor, claiming I needed to collect my father's remaining archives. The man didn't ask questions. Money speaks a universal language. Inside the dim archive room, boxes lined the shelves like tombstones of forgotten business deals. One box had Clara's handwriting on it. Charity Documentation 2022. Inside were no charity documents, just printed emails, legal drafts, and receipts, all detailing transfers between Price Holdings and a private account under Clara Hammond. At the very bottom, a glossy envelope caught my eye. Inside was a printed wedding itinerary mock-up. Her name and Gerald's, in looping silver script, dated for September. 3 months after my father's death, my chest tightened. It wasn't just betrayal. It was treason against my family name. I photographed everything, every page, every receipt. Then I called my father's lawyer. "Mr. Holloway," I said, voice steady despite the storm inside me. "I need to request an emergency board session regarding Price's management and the integrity of Walker Industries' transition. Do you have cause?" "Oh, I have cause," I said, "and I'll bring proof." 2 days later, the boardroom was packed. 12 members, most of whom had worked with my father for decades, sat waiting. Gerald entered last, calm and confident, wearing a navy suit and a smirk. Clara followed a few minutes later, dressed in ivory and pearls like she was walking into a movie scene. Not a reckoning. "Ethan," Gerald greeted, "I wasn't aware you'd called this meeting. What's the purpose?" I placed a folder on the table. Transparency, I said evenly. The board's murmurs quieted as I projected the emails onto the screen. Every one of them. Clara's messages, the financial transfers, the draft marriage contract. At first Gerald tried to laugh it off. These are fabricated, he said, his voice a fraction too high. Ethan, you've clearly misunderstood. Save it, I cut in. You've been siphoning company funds and using my father's estate to build your own safety net. You thought marrying her would cement your claim. My father saw through you both, Clara finally spoke, her tone brittle. Ethan, you're grieving. You're twisting things. Really? I pulled out the photo from my father's desk, sliding it across the table toward her. Because this looks pretty straightforward. Her hand trembled. Her face went pale. I kept going. You seduced my dying father's partner for access. You manipulated him into adding that clause. You thought I'd fold, that I'd let guilt blind me. But he warned me. He left me everything I needed to burn this lie down. Silence filled the room. Every pair of eyes was on her now. Gerald's mask cracked. Clara, you said he'd... I didn't think he'd... She stammered, but the damage was done. I turned to the board. My father built this company on trust, and I'll be damned if I let it rot in the hands of the people who betrayed him. When it was over, Gerald was escorted out of the building by security. Clara tried to follow me into the hallway, tears streaking her makeup. Ethan, please, it's not what you think. It's exactly what I think, I said quietly. You played your part too well. She reached for my hand, desperate. I loved you. I looked at her, the woman I'd once thought was my future, and said, You loved what came with me, and now it's gone. She collapsed against the wall, sobbing, but I didn't look back. That night, I sat alone in my father's study. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. The air felt cleaner. Among the documents I'd recovered, one more letter waited. Sealed, with my name written in his familiar, steady script. I opened it slowly. Son, you will find your strength not in what you inherit, but in what you refuse to lose. I knew about them long before you did. I let them think they'd won. Because some lessons can't be taught, only lived. When the truth comes, don't run from it. Follow it. You did. I'm proud of you. Dad. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in my pocket. For the first time since he died, I felt like I'd truly heard his voice again. The storm had finally passed, but the silence it left behind was deafening. For days after the board meeting, I wandered through my father's estate in a daze. The rooms felt too big, the echoes too sharp. The air smelled like old books and rain-soaked earth. The empire he built was safe now, but I wasn't sure I was. Gerald's removal from Walker Industries made headlines. The story broke like wildfire. Corporate partner exposed in estate fraud. Investors panicked for 48 hours, then steadied when I released a statement promising transparency and reform. Clara vanished from public view. Her social media went dark. Her apartment emptied overnight. I thought that was the end of it. But closure, I learned, isn't silence. It's the absence of need for revenge. And I wasn't there yet. A week later, I received a small box at my doorstep. No return address. Inside was a silver key and a note written in a familiar hand. He wanted you to have this when it was over. Mr. Halloway. The key had the number 47 engraved on it. It took me a moment to recognize it. The safe deposit box number from my father's old bank. That night, I went there alone. The banker led me to a quiet room lined with private booths and thick velvet curtains. Inside box 47 was a single folder and a leather journal bound with a thin red ribbon. The folder contained property deeds, not for the estate, but for a small cottage by the coast. I'd never seen it before. The journal was heavier, worn at the edges. On the first page, my father's handwriting greeted me again. If you're reading this, the storm has passed. You've seen the truth for what it is. Now it's time to remember who you are beyond it. The journal was part diary, part letter. He had written about his early years, when he started Walker Industries, when he met my mother, when he first hired Gerald. There was one entry dated 6 months before his death. I know they think I don't see what's happening. Gerald has grown greedy. Clara lost in her reflection. But Ethan, he still sees people as they are. That's why I can't shield him from this. He must learn what betrayal costs, so he can learn the worth of truth. I closed the journal and stared at the words for a long time. My father hadn't been blind. He'd orchestrated their downfall with precision, not out of vengeance, but to make me stronger. The cottage was in a quiet seaside town 2 hours north. I drove there the next day, the highway unfolding like a silver ribbon beneath the morning sun. When I arrived, the house stood on a hill overlooking the ocean. White walls, blue shutters, and a porch that creaked when I stepped on it. It smelled faintly of salt and cedar. Inside, the rooms were simple. Bare furniture, a few photos of my mother, and one framed picture on the mantel. Me as a child, holding my father's hand on this very shore. It hit me then. He'd brought me here once, long ago, a memory buried under years of noise. I sat on the porch until sunset, watching waves crash against the rocks below. For the first time since everything began, I didn't feel angry, just quiet. Over the next few weeks, I began rebuilding my life piece by piece. I took control of Walker Industries fully, not as a legacy, but as a responsibility. I closed the unnecessary branches, started scholarships in my father's name, and restructured the board to include people who had been overlooked, the loyal employees who had kept the company standing through the chaos. But more than that, I rebuilt myself. There was a strange peace in solitude, in early mornings with black coffee and the sound of gulls, in long walks by the water where no one knew my name. I even started writing, notes at first, then pages, the story of everything that happened, not to publish, just to remember. Sometimes I caught myself thinking about Clara, wondering if she regretted it. Once I even drafted a letter. I forgive you. But I never sent it. Forgiveness isn't a gift you hand someone. It's the weight you stop carrying. One morning, while reviewing charity proposals, my assistant mentioned a name I hadn't heard in months. "Sir, there's a foundation requesting a partnership, the Hammond Initiative." Clara's last name. I took the folder. Inside was a proposal for funding rehabilitation centers for single mothers and victims of financial abuse. The signature at the bottom made my heart tighten. Clara Hammond. I stared at it for a long time. The writing was familiar but steadier, softer. The project was legitimate. No scams, no hidden agendas. Just good work. For the first time I felt no bitterness. Only understanding. Maybe people break for reasons we'll never know. Maybe they heal in silence. I approved the funding. Quietly, anonymously. Months passed. The world moved on, as it always does. Gerald was facing trial for fraud and embezzlement. I didn't attend the hearings. The lawyers handled it. I had no interest in vengeance anymore. I spent more time at the cottage. I started growing herbs, fixing the deck, painting the old shutters. The rhythm of normal life became something sacred. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, I opened my father's journal again. At the very end, he'd written one last entry. "If you've made it here, son, then you've already won. I built a company. You built a soul. Don't chase what I had. Build what you need. Love will find you again when you're ready to see it." I smiled through the ache in my chest. 2 months later, while visiting a local charity event, I met someone new, Anna. She worked for a nonprofit that helped children of bankrupt families. We talked for hours about books, storms, and beginnings that never feel like beginnings until they're over. She didn't know who I was. Not the company, not the scandal. Just Ethan, a quiet man who liked the ocean. And for the first time, that was enough. One night as we sat by the shore, she asked, "Do you ever miss the life you had before all this?" I thought about it. The mansion, the boardrooms, the sharp suits and sharper people. And then I shook my head. "No," I said softly. "That life wasn't mine. It was borrowed. This one's real." She smiled, her eyes reflecting the last light of the day. "Then you're luckier than most." Maybe she was right. Maybe loss is the tax we pay for clarity. And maybe inheritance isn't what's written on paper. It's what survives after the lies burn away. The ocean roared beneath us, endless and alive. I closed my eyes and felt the wind brush against my skin. Salt, sun, and the quiet hum of peace. In that moment I realized my father had given me the greatest inheritance of all. Not wealth, not vengeance, but freedom.